So, Jahara really set me up here to start off by making sure that you all know that it's my fault that we've been deconstructing all these Christmas carols. So I want to let you in on how that came about because I'm a little crazy. Corey and I talked about that this morning. So I was at work. I was doing some painting. When I paint, I really like to listen to music, right? So I turned on Spotify, started listening to some music. And do you guys ever have those moments, maybe it's just me, but where no matter what you turn on, it just isn't what you're feeling? Yeah, that was me that day, right? Not feeling this, not feeling that. I wasn't feeling anything. There's one thing, though, that I can always turn on, that I can always feel. That's Christmas music, everybody. Doesn't matter the time of year, I love Christmas music so much. So much. So I decided to break many of your cardinal rules, and I turned on Christmas music even before Halloween. It was like mid-October when I started listening to Christmas music. And so I started listening to it, having a grand old time. I just praying while I'm painting, thanking Jesus for being Jesus and thanking God for sending him and all those things, right? Christmas. It really is the most wonderful time of the year. And then that song came on. It's the most wonderful time of the year. She sees what I did there. Yeah, that was good. It's the most wonderful time of the year came on. And all of the things that I had been praying about, all of the reasons that it's the most wonderful time of the year, do you know they're not included even once in that song? Not a single time, right? I was bopping along to that song, and all of a sudden I was like, hold up. This doesn't match what I was just thinking and praying based on the other songs. But we go to the song. We sing it's the most wonderful time of the year, right? We haven't here because it's not really yeah. Anyway. But that song says that it's the most wonderful time of the year because of the kids and their jingle bells. It says it's the most wonderful time of the year because friends and family come around. It's a good thing. It's the most wonderful time of the year because of the carols. It's the most wonderful time of the year because everybody has a holiday greeting. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. It's the most wonderful time of the year because everyone is also going to tell you to be full of joy. Why do we have to be told to be full of joy? It's also the most wonderful time of the year according to that song because of the ghost stories, which I really don't understand if I'm honest, and I didn't even look into it one time. But apparently ghost stories were a thing when that song came about. So as I was listening to the music and that song came on, I texted Jahara, and I was like, hey, bro, what if this year we actually examine the things that we say and sing and do that all revolve around Christmas, just to make sure that the real reason for Christmas is still in the church? Right? The world's going to do what the world's going to do. But let's not let that creep into what we do at church. Let us think about the things that we sing and say and do around this time of year. So that's how this series came about. So we're going to continue that. We're going to continue that this morning. And I have a song queued up. I don't. Sean has a song queued up. So Sean's going to start playing this song in just a second. And when you know what song we're going to talk about this morning, you go ahead and just shout it out. Okay? Go ahead, Sean. Whoa, good. All right, we got it. We already got it. It's good. Whew. In case you missed it, it was We Three Kings. We Three Kings, right? You know that song? So let's you know what? Let's listen just a little longer because Laura got it like real quick, right? Some people are like, what? She didn't know. It's good. We Three Kings. This is a song apparently about these three kings, right? Who come to Jesus to worship Jesus. All right, that's good. So we're going to look at that this morning. We're going to look at these three kings this morning because this song is actually pretty accurate, except for a couple things. One, they're not kings. They're not kings. It's not what that means at all. The word means, we'll get into that in a second. Also, they weren't there when Jesus was born. Sorry to break that to you in all of your nativity sets. But the kings, the wise men, yeah, they weren't really there when Jesus was born. We did this thing growing up. Maybe it was just me, but like I always like to mess with like my mom when she was setting up the nativity set. It's all pretty and stuff. And then I would take the kings, the magi that we're going to talk about, and I'd just put them really far away in the house. Like to scale, how far away would they be from this nativity set if they're this big and all. It's a good time. Turn to Matthew 2. We'll be in Matthew 2 this morning, verses 1 through 12. I'm going to be reading from the NIV translation. It'll be on the screens as well. Matthew 2, verse 1 says this. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet was written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. After they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Here's the context of this passage, the context of Matthew. Matthew doesn't actually go into the birth of Jesus. Right? Matthew chapter 1 at the end, he records the angel appearing to Joseph, and then he jumps into this visit of the Magi. In this passage, as I was studying it, I found it interesting that it is indeed about the Magi, and we'll talk about who they are in a minute. But there's really three groups of people here, okay? Or it's three groups of people that we're going to study this morning. And these three groups all have different reactions to Jesus. That's what we're going to examine this morning. If you remember last year, I talked about a different group of people around the Christmas story. I really enjoy looking at like these different people. It's so much fun. Anyway, so let's talk about the three groups. The three groups are these. We have the king, we have the religious leaders, and we have the foreigners. Okay, do you see them in this passage? We have the king, the religious leaders, and the foreigners. Interestingly enough, we are supposed to identify with the foreigners of this passage. Definitely not the king, and definitely not the religious leaders. And even more interesting than that, I think, is that Matthew, who wrote this gospel, was Jewish. And the people who would be receiving and reading this gospel would be Jewish as well. So I think if we were to just sort of put that idea in our mind for a second, when you start reading this and you hear about King Herod and the religious leaders, you would probably be like, oh, what did they do? Right? I'm supposed to listen to the religious leaders. What did they do? But Matthew's whole point is they didn't do something. They actually did something wrong. We're supposed to identify with the foreigners. So the first group, the first person in this passage that we're going to look at is the king. This is King Herod the Great. For some context on King Herod, he was not so great. King Herod, he actually killed a lot of his own family, like his sons and his wives, out of pure paranoia. Like, he was worried they were going to take his throne, so he killed them. There's a saying that I came across as I was studying, and it says, it's better to be King Herod's pig than his son. Because King Herod also really wanted to win favor with the Jewish people. So he wasn't Jewish, but he also would eat like a Jewish person would. So he wouldn't eat a pig. He wouldn't kill a pig, but he'll kill his son. King Herod wasn't so great. At the end of his life, he died of like painful disease. There was a name, and I didn't write it down. He died of this painful disease, and as he was nearing the end of his life, he actually told his daughters, when I die, I want you to take hundreds of religious leaders, put them in the Colosseum, and kill them. That way people will mourn over my death. That's delusional. They're not mourning over you. They're mourning over the people. Anyway, so King Herod is not so great, but King Herod the Great is who we're looking at in this passage. In 40 BC, when he added Judea to his kingdom, he married the daughter of a high priest and built the temple in Jerusalem as like a gift to be like, I like you guys, please include me in the Jewish things. So when the Magi come in verse 2 and say, where's the one who has been born, King of the Jews? King Herod is like, wait a minute. I've worked really hard to be their king. Nobody else is their king except me. So verse 3 says, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When King Herod heard that there was another king who was being called the King of the Jews, it disturbed him. He was upset. And I also thought it was interesting, this is purely an aside. It also says, and all Jerusalem with him. And I was like, why is Jerusalem upset? The commentaries that I read said that Jerusalem was probably upset because they were like, uh-oh, what's King Herod going to do now? Because he was full of paranoia and delusional. So King Herod, in hearing of Jesus, is disturbed. And in being disturbed, he decides he needs a little more information. Right? In verse 7 of Matthew 2, it said, then Herod called the Magi secretly. So King Herod's forming this plan. And found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. So now King Herod has this frame of reference. And then he said, Go and make a careful search for the child. And as soon as you find him, report to me so that I may go and worship him." Spoiler alert, King Herod does not want to go worship him. He has a much different plan. And in fact, later on in Matthew chapter 2, in verse 16, he realizes that the Magi didn't listen to what he asked them to do. And so he just kills all of the boys in Bethlehem under 2 years old and under. Which tells us that the Magi said that they saw the star about 2 years ago. So this is about 2 years after Jesus' birth, which is why you should put your wise men really far away in your house, in your nativity. This is fun. All right. So King Herod had a reaction. He had a response to Jesus, and it was this. King Herod reacted with hatred toward Jesus. King Herod reacted with hatred towards Jesus. The second group of people that we read about in this passage are the religious leaders. The religious leaders are the chief priests. And just so you know who these chief priests would have been, the chief priests were the theologians of the day. They know their scriptures. They just study them. That's what they do. In fact, they start their training to be a chief priest at about 5 years old. At 5 years old, they start learning scripture. And they learn until they're 30 years old. And then they can start their ministry, we'll say. At that point, they are considered rabbis. And they can have disciples of their own. So these people, these religious leaders, these chief priests, they would know their scriptures, which means that they should be able to know the Messiah. That's their job. Their job is to know the scriptures and the prophecies and all the things so that when Messiah comes, they can go, "There he is. Found him." And they sort of do that, right? We read that in verse 4, King Herod calls together all these people. It says, when he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. So King Herod had to ask. And they respond. The chief priests are the ones who respond. They say, "In Bethlehem, in Judah. For this is what the prophet has written." And they say the prophecy of where Christ is to be born. So they know where Jesus is, but they don't go to worship the Messiah. Right? The ones who should know Jesus, the ones who should be ready to receive Jesus, just stay in their comfy temple, and they don't actually go. John chapter 1, verse 11 says that he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. That's what John's talking about. His own people, Jesus' own people, didn't receive him when he came. I thought that it was interesting that these same religious leaders and their successors would probably be the same ones to fight with Jesus throughout his earthly ministry. Which means that they would then probably be the same ones who succeeded in what King Herod tried to do. These would be the same ones who would kill Jesus later. I think that we learn from these people. We learn from the chief priests that we have to watch our pride. Sometimes we can be so in our head with the scriptures that we miss when things actually happen. We can know all of the scriptures. We can know all of this stuff. But then when things happen in front of us, we miss it. I hope that doesn't happen when Christ comes again. Right? We hear that he's coming with trumpet sound and with all this fanfare. But what if we go, nah, that's probably not it, and we just keep going about our daily lives? That's what the chief priests did. They go, I think there was a baby born in Bethlehem, but I'm not going to actually go check it out. The chief priests respond by rejecting Jesus. And they don't outwardly reject him right now, but they also don't go with the Magi to worship him. Which brings us to our last group. This last group are the foreigners. In the song, they're called the kings. They're not kings. They're magi. Another word for that could be wise men. But I want to go into who these magi are contextually so that we can understand maybe a little bit who they are, because we don't really have these type of people in our world today. Okay? So magi, they are physicians, healers, astronomers, astrologers. They take all of the things that you could possibly study, and they study it. They're really smart. That's who the Magi are. They're sort of like really, really early Enlightenment thinkers. That's how I think of them. I think of them like these people who just hang out with each other and sit around and debate and try things. And in that, they build their intelligence to the point where kings actually call on them. Kings actually go, I'm really confused by this thing. Get me one of these wise people. Get me a magi. We see this in Daniel. Daniel chapter 2, it talks about Nebuchadnezzar having his dream and him calling in all these people. Those would have been like magi. I found in a couple different commentaries, I thought this was interesting. This is just for you to think about. I don't know if this is true. But a couple different commentaries talked about the fact that if magi were in Daniel, in Daniel chapter 5, was promoted to this high-level position over all of these wise men, then perhaps Daniel was in contact with this group of people called magi, right? This is a lot of people. It's not just the 3-ish people who come to see Jesus. There's a lot of magi around the region. So a couple commentaries connect Daniel to the magi and say, if Daniel had prophetic dreams, maybe he shared with the magi these prophetic dreams. So when the magi were then looking at the stars, they said, oh, it's time. I heard that prophecy passed down for me from this guy. There could be a king. I thought that was interesting. Maybe they heard the prophecy first from Daniel. Maybe when they saw the star, they said, that thing's really different, let's go. Maybe they were just thinking that there's a difference here, and I need to study it, I need to go. Whatever it is, the Magi went. So, just to wrap up who the Magi are, the Magi are the geniuses of the day. I thought of it like this. Take the most intelligent person that you know. Mix that person with your favorite wizard. Yes, I said wizard. That's how magi would be viewed, right? Think of like think of like Stephen Hawking and like Gandalf being mixed together, and then they just show up. You'd be like, oh, I guess there's a wizard here and he's really smart. Maybe we should listen to what they have to say. That's really how magi were viewed then. They were highly revered. So when they come, in Matthew chapter 2, when they come, and it says that they talked to King Herod, the reason that they had access to King Herod was because of who they were, right? People don't just have access to kings, but the Magi did because of who they were. So here's their reaction to Christ. Matthew chapter 2, I'm going to read verse 1 and 2. It says this, it says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem and in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. The first thing that the Magi did is obey. They saw the star, they knew to follow it, so they started walking. They obeyed. And when they show up to Jerusalem, to the king's temple, they show up there because they're looking for a king. Where are kings except in the temple? But they find out that they're about 5 miles off, right? That's about the distance from Bethlehem to Jerusalem. So when they hear this, verse 9, after they heard the king, they went on their way. And that star that they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. So when they hear that they're a little bit off, they go, okay, and they start walking again. And they reach the place where the child is. This is where it gets really fun. Verse 10. When they saw the star, here's their reaction. They were overjoyed. The ESV puts it this way. It says, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. I really like that. That's like, wow, I'm excited. If you don't remember, it's okay. Does anyone remember what I talked about last Christmas? Kind of. The shepherds, right? Last Christmas I talked about the shepherds. This is really fun. Turn to Luke chapter 2, verse 10 real quick. I got really excited when I saw this. Luke 2, verse 10. This is when the angel comes to the shepherds, and it says, but the angel said to them, do not be afraid. I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all people. You see the connection? What did the angel promise would be the reaction when somebody meets Jesus? Great joy. When the Magi get to Jesus, what's their reaction? Great joy. I don't know, some of you might not get it. It's great, it's really cool. It's exciting. It's rejoicing exceedingly with great joy. The angels promised that would be the reaction when people see Jesus. When people see Jesus, their reaction will be great joy. Super cool. Verse 11, Matthew 2, verse 11, says, on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. The next thing they did is they humbled themselves before the king. Remember, this king is still a toddler. These are magi, the genius wizards, coming to Jesus as a baby and falling on their face in worship. These are the foreigners, the people who shouldn't be ready to receive Jesus. They don't have any of the prophecies. They don't have any of the scriptures to go off of. But when they see him, they bow down and they worship him because that's the only response that they can have. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. They presented a 2-year-old toddler king with gifts of gold, incense, and myrrh. These foreigners, when they saw Jesus, they only had one reaction, and it was worship. They worshiped him. When I was sharing all of this excitement around this message last night, I'm quoting Jenny. She said this because it was profound. Ready? I asked her if she wanted to preach. I was like, this is all you. She said no. She said this. She said, isn't it interesting that even as a 2-year-old, Jesus was hanging out with the foreigners? Yeah, I know. I was like, oh, you sure you don't want to do a thing? Because, I mean, that's good. Jesus came to seek and save the lost, any one of us. And in his earthly ministry, if you think about it, whenever the religious leaders didn't receive him, he didn't be like, oh, you're supposed to be. No. He said, all right, well, these people will. There are 2 reactions for those who find Jesus. The first reaction is you can respond with hatred, contempt, and rejection. Or, if you truly accept Jesus, you can respond with love, with devotion, and with worship. You can't sit on the fence and not pick, right? How will you respond to Jesus? How will you respond to Jesus this year? I think in all of the busyness, it's really, really easy to just fly through this season and never think about the actual reason. And I know that we celebrate Jesus all year, right? But right now, there are so many opportunities to share Jesus with people. And if we are just as busy as the world is, we'll miss all those opportunities. How will you respond to Jesus? There's one more carol that I want to play this morning. Let's see if you can get this one. Go ahead, Sean. coming. Let's grab a different version. This is just in building anticipation. It's a very different version. I think it'll be much better. Yeah. I think I've heard it. It's the little drummer boy. This is one of my favorite Christmas carols. And this is also one of a lot of people's least favorite Christmas carols. But here's why it's my favorite. That's good, Sean. Thank you. This is my favorite Christmas carol because of the story that it tells. Some of you are like, it's still a lame story. I like the story a lot. Because when we see the Magi, we're like, whoa, they worshiped him in a way that there's no way I can ever get to. There's no way that I'm ever going to open this treasure chest of gold for Jesus. Right? But that's what this song talks about. We've got some of the lyrics up here. I just took out all of the parumpa pum pums. The song starts off by saying, "Come, see the newborn king, bring fine gifts to the king, and honor him." Cool. But here's the issue. Every story needs an issue. Next slide. The drummer boy says, "But I'm poor. I don't have any gift that's good enough for you, Jesus." Jahara talked about this message before, and I think we keep coming back to it. But the question is, but what do you have? What do you have? Because God has given you something to give back. Anything that he's given you, give back to him. So it goes on to say, next slide, "Should I play for you on my drum? Because that's what you've given me." Mary nodded for the baby because the baby wasn't able to, apparently. God has given us something so that when we see him, we can respond to him with great joy. So what did the little drummer boy do? Next slide. I played my drum. I played my best. In looking at the Magi, I don't want us to miss the fact that our worship might look different than somebody else's worship, and that's okay. To one person, rejoicing might be just exactly what you picture, right? Raising your hands and clapping and just being outwardly so excited. To somebody else, rejoicing might be just telling somebody how excited they are, which is always interesting, right? I always think it's funny when people don't laugh at a joke, but instead they say, "That's funny." Oh, okay, I guess. But that's okay. If our response to Jesus is being so excited that it actually breaks us out of our shell a little bit to go, "I got to tell you what I just read," then that's enough. To one person, humbling yourself might look like the Magi did, right? It says that they bowed down and worshiped him. To another, the posture might look a little different, but it's still humility. To one person, giving may look extreme, like giving gold and frankincense and myrrh, whatever that is. Well, another might be a song that they give. Responses to Jesus are filled with great joy, but what they are looks different based on what you've been given and how you've been blessed. And that's okay. So it really is the most wonderful time of the year, but only if you see Jesus in it. Don't be like the religious leaders who were filled with the scriptures but missed the Messiah. Be like the Magi who had everything, right? The Magi really had everything that we look for. They had all the wealth, they had all the intelligence, they had all the things. And when they saw Jesus, they just gave it all to him. That's our response. For many of us, this is a really stressful time of year with things to do and parties, gifts to get and wrap, food to bake. All of a sudden your phone goes off because you have a party to go to in 10 minutes that you forgot you said you were going to go to, so now you're rushing out the door to get to it. Don't forget that the reason we're doing all these things is because of what Jesus did. Don't miss Jesus this Christmas. Let him fill you with the promise of great joy. Dear Lord, I thank you for your word. Dear Lord, I thank you that you have come to us. Lord, I ask that you just give us a mindset that's focused on you and you alone. Even in this moment, as I'm closing, I feel that there are thoughts of what we have to do after this service. There are thoughts of what we need to get to next, because Christmas is only a few days away. Lord, I ask that you just focus our minds on you. Allow us to hear you. Allow us to be with you. In your name I pray. Amen.